Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Chapter 5, The Golden Tickets. You mean people are actually going to be allowed to go inside the factory? Cried Grandpa Joe. Read us what it says quickly. All right, said Mr. Bucket, smoothing out the newspaper. Listen. Evening Bulletin. Mr. Willy Wonka, the candy-making genius, whom nobody has seen for the last 10 years, has sent out the following notice today. I, Willy Wonka, have decided to allow 5 children, just 5, mind you, and no more, to visit my factory this year. These lucky 5 will be shown around personally by me, and they will be allowed to see all the secrets of the magic of my factory. Then, at the end of the tour, a special present, all of them will be given, enough chocolates and candies to last them for the rest of their lives. So watch out for the golden tickets. 5 golden tickets have been printed on golden paper, and these 5 golden tickets have been hidden underneath the ordinary wrapping paper of 5 ordinary candy bars. These 5 candy bars may be anywhere, in any shop, in any street, in any town, in any country in the world, upon any counter where Wonka's candies are sold. And the 5 lucky finders of the 5 golden tickets are the only ones who will be allowed to visit my factory and see what it's like now inside. Good luck to you all, and happy hunting. Signed, Willy Wonka. The man's dirty, muttered Grandma Josephine. He's brilliant, cried Grandpa Joe. He's a magician. Just imagine what will happen now. The whole world will be searching for those golden tickets. Everyone will be buying Wonka's candy bars in hopes of finding one. He'll sell more than ever before. Oh, how exciting it would be to find one. And all that chocolate and candies you could eat for the rest of your life. For free, cried Grandpa George. Just imagine that. They'd have to deliver them in a truck, cried Grandma Georgina. It makes me quite ill to think of it, said Grandma Josephine. Nonsense. Wouldn't it be something, Charlie, to open a bar of candy and see a golden ticket glistening inside? It certainly would, Grandpa. But there isn't any hope, Charlie said sadly. I only get but 1 bar a year. You never know, darling. It's your birthday next week. You have as much chance as anybody else, said Grandma Georgina. I'm afraid that simply isn't true, said Grandpa George. The kids who are going to find the golden tickets are the ones who can afford to buy candy bars every day. Our Charlie only gets 1 a year. There isn't any hope. Chapter 6. The First 2 Finders. The very next day, the first golden ticket was found. The finder was a boy called Augustus Gloop, and Mr. Bucket's evening newspaper carried a large picture of him on the front page. The picture showed a 9-year-old boy who was so enormously fat that he looked as though he had been blown up with a powerful pump. Great flabby folds of fat bulged out from every part of his body, and his face was like a monstrous ball of dough with 2 small, greedy, curtainty eyes peering out upon the world. The town in which Augustus Gloop lived, the newspaper said, had gone wild with excitement over their hero. Flags were flying from all the windows. Children had been given a holiday from school, and a parade was being organized in honor of the famous youth. I just knew Augustus would find the golden tickets, his mother told the newspaper. He eats so many candy bars a day that it was almost impossible not for him to find one. Eating is his hobby, you know. That's all he's interested in, but still, that's better than being a hooligan and shooting all zip guns and things like that in his spare time, isn't it? And what I always say is, he wouldn't go on eating like he does unless he needed the nourishment, would he? It's all vitamins anyway. What a thrill it will be for him to visit Mr. Wonka's marvelous factory. We're just as proud as parents can be. What a revolting young woman, said Grandma Josephine. And what a repulsive boy, said Grandpa George. Only 4 golden tickets left, said Grandma Georgina. I wonder who'll get those. And now the whole country, indeed, the whole world seemed to be suddenly to be caught up in a mad candy-buying spree. Everybody searching frantically for those precious remaining tickets. Full-grown women were seen going into sweet shops and buying 10 Wonka bars at a time, then tearing off the wrappers on the spot and peering eagerly for a glint of the golden paper. Children were taking hammers and smashing their piggy banks and running out to the shops with handfuls of money. In one city, a famous gangster robbed a bank of $5,000 and spent the whole lot on candy bars at that same afternoon. And when the police entered his house to arrest him, they found him sitting on the floor amidst mountains of candy, ripping off wrappers with the blade of a long dagger. In far-off Russia, a woman called Charlotte Roos claimed to have found the second ticket, but it turned out to be a clever fake. In England, the famous scientist Professor Falbudi invented a machine that would tell you at once, without opening the wrapper of a candy bar, whether or not there is a golden ticket hidden underneath it. The machine had a mechanical arm that shot out with tremendous force and grabbed hold of anything that had the slightest bit of gold inside of it. And for a moment, it looked like the answer to everything. But unfortunately, while Professor was showing off the machine to the public at the candy counter of a large department store, the mechanical arm shot out to grab the gold filling in the back tooth of a duchess who was standing nearby. There was an ugly scene, and the machine was smashed by the crowd. Suddenly, on the day before Charlie Bucket's birthday, the newspapers announced that the second golden ticket had been found. The lucky person was a small girl called Veruca Salt, who lived with her rich parents in a great city far away. Once again, Mr. Bucket's evening newspaper carried a big picture of the finder. She was sitting between her beaming father and mother in the living room of the house, waving the golden ticket above her head and grinning from ear to ear. Veruca's father, Mr. Salt, had eagerly explained to the newspapermen exactly how the ticket was found.
You see, fellas, he said, as soon as my little girl told me that she simply had to have one of those golden tickets, I went out to the town and started buying up all the Wonka candy bars I could lay my hands on. Thousands of them I must have bought, hundreds of thousands, and then I had them loaded onto trucks and sent directly to my own factory. I'm in the peanut business, you see, and I've got about 100 women working for me over my joints, shelling peanuts for roasting and for salting, and that's what they do all day long. Those women, they sit there, they shell peanuts. So I says to them, okay, girls, I says, from now on, you stop shelling peanuts and you start shelling the wrappers of these crazy candy bars instead. And they did. I had every worker in the place yanking the paper off those bars of chocolate full speed ahead from morning till night. But 3 days went by and we had no luck. Oh, it was terrible. My little Veruca got more and more upset each day. Every time I went home, she would scream at me, "Where's my golden ticket? I want my golden ticket!" And she would lie for hours on the floor kicking and yelling in the most disturbing of ways. Well, sir, I just hated to see my little girl feeling unhappy like that, so I vowed I would keep up the search until I got her what she wanted. And then suddenly, on the evening of the 4th day, some of my women workers yelled, "I've got it, I got a golden ticket." And I said, "Give it to me quick," and she did, and I rushed it home and gave it to my darling Veruca, and now she's all smiles, and we have a happy home once again.
That's even worse than the fat boy, said Grandma Josephine. She needs a real good spanking, said Grandma Georgina. I don't think that girl's father played it quite fair, Grandpa. Do you? Charlie murmured.
He spoils her, and no good can come from ever spoiling a child like that, Charlie. You mark my words.
Come to bed, my darling, said Charlie's mother. Tomorrow's your birthday. Don't forget that. So I expect you'll be up early to open your present. A Wonka candy bar, cried Charlie. It's a Wonka candy bar, isn't it? Yes, my love. Of course it is. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if I found the third golden ticket inside it? Charlie said.
Bring it in here when you get it, Grandpa Joe said. Then we can watch you all take off the wrapper.
Chapter 7. Charlie's Birthday. Happy birthday! Cried the 4 old grandparents as Charlie came into the room the next morning. He smiled nervously and sat down at the edge of the bed. Charlie was holding his present, his only present, very carefully in his hands. Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mallow Delight, it said on the wrapper. The 4 old people, 2 at the other end of the bed, propped themselves up on the pillows and stared with anxious eyes at the candy bar in Charlie's hands. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket came in and stood at the foot of the bed watching Charlie. The room became silent. Everybody was waiting now for Charlie to start opening his present. Charlie looked back down at the candy bar. He ran his fingers slowly back and forth along the length of it, stroking it lovingly in the shiny paper. He made sharp, crackling noises in the quiet room. Then Mrs. Bucket said gently, "You mustn't be too disappointed, my darling. If you don't find what you're looking for underneath that wrapper, you really can't expect to be as lucky as all that."
She's quite right, my boy, Mr. Bucket said.
Charlie didn't say anything. "Oh, after all," Grandma Josephine said, "in the whole wide world, there are only 3 tickets left to be found." "The thing to remember," Grandma Georgina said, "is that whatever happens, you'll still have a bar of candy."
Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mallow Delight, cried Grandpa George. It's one of the best of them. You'll just love it.
Yes, I know, whispered Charlie.
Just forget about all those golden tickets and enjoy the candy, Grandpa Joe said. Why don't you do that?
They all knew it was ridiculous to expect this one poor little candy bar to have a magic ticket inside it. And they were trying as gently and as kindly as they could to prepare Charlie for the disappointment. But there was one thing that the grown-ups also knew, and it was that however small the chance might be of striking lucky, the chance was there. The chance had to be there. This particular candy bar had as much chance as any other candy bar of having a golden ticket. And that was why all the grandparents and parents in the room were actually just as tense and excited as Charlie was, although they were all pretending to be very calm.
You better go ahead and open it, or you'll be late for school.
You might as well get it over with, Grandma Georgina said.
Open it. Please open it. You're making me jumpy, Grandpa George said. Very slowly, Charlie's fingers began to tear open one small corner of wrapping paper. The old people in the back all leaned forward, craning their scraggy necks. Then suddenly, as though he couldn't bear the suspense any longer, Charlie tore the wrapper down the middle, and onto his lap there fell a light brown, cream-colored chocolate candy bar.
There is no sign of a golden ticket anywhere.
Well, that's that, said Grandpa Joe brightly. It's just what we expected.
Charlie looked up. 4 kind old faces were watching him intently from the bed. He smiled at them, a small sad smile, and then he shrugged his shoulders and picked up the candy bar and held it out to his mother and said, "Here, Mother, have a bit, we'll share it. I want everybody to taste it."
"Certainly not," his mother said, and all the others cried, No, we wouldn't we wouldn't dream of it. It's all yours.
Please," begged Charlie, turning around and offering it to Grandpa Joe, but neither he nor anyone else would even take a tiny bite. "It's time to go to school, my darling," Mrs. Bucket said, putting an arm around Charlie's skinny shoulders. "Come on, or you'll be late." Chapter 8. 2 more golden tickets found. That evening, Mr. Bucket's newspaper announced the finding of not only the 3rd golden ticket, but the 4th as well. 2 golden tickets found today, screamed the headlines. Only 1 more left! "All right," said Grandpa Joe when the whole family was gathered in the old people's room after summer.
"Let's hear who found them."
"The 3rd ticket," read Mr. Bucket, holding the newspaper up close to his face because his eyes were bad and he couldn't afford glasses.
"The 3rd ticket was found by Mrs. Violet Burgard. There was great excitement in the Burgard household when our reporter arrived to interview the lucky young lady. Cameras were clicking and flashbulbs were flashing, and people were pushing and jostling and trying to get a bit closer to the famous girl. And the famous girl was standing on a chair in the living room and waving the golden ticket madly at arm's length as though she were flagging a taxi. She was talking very fast and very loudly to everyone, but it was not easy to hear all that she said because she was chewing so ferociously upon a piece of gum at the same time.
"I'm a gum chewer normally," she shouted, "but when I heard about these ticket things at Mr. Wonka's, I laid off the gum, and I switched to candy bars in the hope of striking lucky. Now, of course, I'm right back on gum. I just adore gum. I can't do without it. I munch it all day long, except for a few minutes at mealtimes, when I take it out and I stick it behind my ear for safekeeping. To tell you the honest truth, I simply wouldn't feel comfortable if I didn't have the little wedge of gum to chew on every moment of the day. I really wouldn't. My mother says it's not ladylike, and it looks ugly to see a girl's jaw going up and down like mine do all the time. But I don't agree. And who's she to criticize anyway? Because if you ask me, I'd say that her jaws are going up and down almost as much as mine are, just from yelling at me every minute of the day." "Now, Violet," Mrs. Beauregard said from a far corner of the room, where she was standing on the piano to avoid being trampled by the mob. "All right, Mother, keep your hair on," Miss Beauregard shouted. "And now," she went on, turning to the reporters again, "it may interest you to know that this piece of gum I'm chewing on right at this moment is the one I've been working on for over 3 months solid. That's a record, that is. It's a beaten record, held by my best friend, Miss Cornelia Prince Meadow. And was she mad? It's my most treasured possession now. This piece of gum is. At nights, I just stick it on the end of my bedpost, and it's as good as ever in the morning. A bit hard at first, maybe, but it softens up again after I've given a few good chews. Before I start chewing for world record, I used to change my piece of gum once a day. I used to do it in our elevator on the way home from school. Why the elevator? Because I like sticking the gooey piece that I just finished onto the elevator buttons. Then the next person who came along and pressed a button got my old gum on the end of their finger. Ha! And what a racket they kicked up, some of them. You get the best results with women who have expensive gloves on. Oh yes, I'm thrilled to be going to Mr. Wonka's factory. And I understand that afterwards, he's going to give me enough gum to last me the rest of my whole life. Whoopee! Hooray!
Beastly.
Oh, said Grandma Josephine.
Despicable. She'll come to a sticky end one day chewing all that gum. You see if she doesn't,
said Grandma Georgina. And who got the 4th golden ticket, Daddy? Charlie asked.
Now, let me see,
said Mr. Bucket, peering at the newspaper again.
Ah, yes, here we are. The 4th golden ticket was found by a boy called Mike TV.
Another bad lot, I'll be bound, muttered Grandma Josephine. Don't interrupt, Grandma, said Mrs. Bucket.
The TV household,
said Mr. Bucket, going on with his reading,
was crammed like all the others with excited visitors when our reporter arrived. But young Mr. TV, the lucky winner, seemed extremely annoyed by the whole business.
Can't you fools see I'm watching TV?
He said angrily.
I wish you wouldn't interrupt.
The 9-year-old boy was seated before an enormous television set with his eyes glued to the screen and was watching a film in which one bunch of gangsters was shooting up another bunch of gangsters with machine guns. Mike TV himself had no less than 18 toy pistols of various sizes hanging from belts around his body, and every now and then again he would leap up into the air and fire off half a dozen rounds from one or another of these weapons.
Quiet!
He shouted when someone tried to ask him a question.
Didn't I tell you not to interrupt? This show's an absolute whiz-banger. It's terrific. I watch it every day. I watch all of them every day, even the crummy ones when there's no shooting. I like the gangsters best. They're terrific, those gangsters, especially when they start pumping each other full of lead or flashing the old stilettos or giving each other the old 1, 2, 3 with their knuckle dusters. Oh boy, what I wouldn't give to be doing that myself. It's a life, I tell you. It's terrific.
That's quite enough, snapped Grandma Josephine. I can't bear to listen to it. Nor me. Do all children behave like this nowadays? Said Grandma Georgina. Like these brats we've been hearing about? Of course not, said Mrs. Bucket, smiling at the old lady in bed. Some do, of course. In fact, quite a lot of them do, but not all of them.
And now there's only 1 ticket left,
said Grandpa George.
Quite so,
sniffed Grandma Georgina. And just as soon as I'll be having cabbage soup for supper tomorrow, that ticket will go to some nasty little beast who doesn't deserve it. Chapter 9. Grandpa Joe Takes a Gamble. The next day when Charlie came home from school and went in to see his grandparents, he found that only Grandpa Joe was awake. The other 3 were all snoring loudly. Shh, whispered Grandpa Joe, and he beckoned Charlie to come closer. Charlie tiptoed over and stood beside the bed. The old man gave Charlie a sly grin and then started rummaging under his pillow with one hand, and when the other came out again, there was an ancient leather purse clutched in the fingers. Under cover of the bedclothes, the old man opened the purse and tipped it upside down. Out fell a single silver 10-cent piece.
It's my secret hold, he whispered. The others don't know I've got it. And now, you and I are going to have one more fling at finding that last ticket. How about today? But you'll have to help me.
Are you sure? Are you sure you want to spend your money on that, Grandpa?
Of course I'm sure, spluttered the old man excitedly. Don't stand there arguing. I'm just as crazy as you are to find that ticket. Here, take the money and run down the street to the nearest store and buy the first Wonka candy bar you see and bring it straight back to me and we'll open it together.
Charlie took the silver coin and slipped quickly out of the room. In 5 minutes he was back.
Have you got it?
Whispered Grandpa Joe, his eyes shining with excitement. Charlie nodded and held out the bar of candy. Wonka's Nutty Crunch Surprise, it said on the wrapper.
Good, 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 the old man whispered, sitting up in the bed and rubbing his hands. Now, come over here and sit close to me and we'll open it together. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, you tear the first off. You tear the first bit off first.
No, you paid for it. You do it. The old man's fingers were trembling most terribly as they fumbled with the candy bar.
We don't have a hope, really, he said, giggling a bit. You do know we don't have a hope, don't you?
Yes, I know that, Grandpa. They looked at each other and both started giggling nervously.
Mind you, there's just that tiny chance that it might be the one. Don't you agree?
Yes, of course. Grandpa, why don't you open it?
All in good time, my boy, all in good time. Which end do you think I should open first?
That corner. The one farthest from you. Just tear off a tiny bit. But not quite enough for us to see anything.
Like that?
Yes. Now a little bit more, Grandpa.
You finish it, I'm too nervous.
No, Grandpa, you must do it yourself.
Very well. Here it goes.
He tore off the wrapper. Shh! And they both stared at what lay underneath. It was a bar of candy and nothing more. All at once, they both saw the funny side of the whole thing, and they burst out into peals of laughter. "What the heck is going on here?" cried Grandma Josephine, waking up suddenly.
Nothing. Go on back to sleep.
Chapter 10. The family begins to starve. During the next 2 weeks, the weather turned very cold. First came the snow. It began very suddenly one morning, just as Charlie Bucket was getting dressed for school. Standing by the window, he saw huge flakes drifting slowly down out of an icy sky that was the color of steel. By evening, it lay 4 feet deep around the tiny house, and Mr. Bucket had to dig a path from the front door to the road. After the snow, there came a freezing gale that blew for days and days without stopping. Oh, how bitter cold it was. Everything that Charlie touched seemed to be made of ice, and each time he stepped outside the door, the wind was like knives against his cheeks. Inside the house, little jets of freezing air came rushing in through the sides of the windows and under the doors, and there was no place to go escape them. The 4 old ones lay silent, huddled in their bed, trying to keep the cold out of their bones. The excitement over the golden tickets had long since forgotten. Nobody in the family gave a thought now to anything except the 2 vital problems of trying to keep warm and trying to get enough to eat. There is something about very cold weather that gives one an enormous appetite. Most of us find ourselves beginning to crave rich steaming stews and apple pies and all kinds of delicious warming dishes. And because we are all a great deal luckier than we realize, we usually get what we want, or near enough. But Charlie Bucket never got what he wanted because the family couldn't afford it, and the cold weather went on, and he became ravenously and desperately hungry. Both bars of candy, the birthday one and the Grandpa Joe one, had long since been nibbled away, and all he got now were those thin, cabbagey meals 3 times a day. Then all at once, the meals became even thinner. The reason was for this. The toothpaste factory, the place where Mr. Bucket worked, suddenly went bust and had to close down. Quickly, Mr. Bucket tried to get another job, but he had no luck. In the end, the only way in which he managed to earn a few pennies was by shoveling snow in the streets. But it wasn't even enough to buy a quarter of the food that 7 people needed. The situation became desperate. Breakfast was a slice of bread for each person now, and lunch was maybe half a boiled potato. Surely everybody in the house began to starve, and every day little Charlie Bucket, trudging through the snow on his way to school, would have to pass Mr. Willy Wonka's giant chocolate factory. And every day as he came nearer to it, he would lift his small pointed nose high in the air and sniff the wonderful sweet smell of melting chocolate. Several times he would stand motionless outside the gates for several minutes on end, taking in deep swallowing breaths as though he was trying to eat the smell itself. "That child," said Grandpa Joe, poking his head out from under the blankets one icy morning. "That child has got to have more food. It doesn't matter about us, we're going to be old to bother with, but a growing boy, he can't go on looking like this. He's beginning to look like a skeleton." not new," murmured Grandma Josephine miserably. "He refuses to take any of ours. I hear his mother tried to slip her own piece of bread onto his plate at breakfast this morning. But he wouldn't touch it. He made her take it back."
"He's a fine little fellow. He deserves better than this," said Grandpa George. And the cruel weather went on and on. Every day Charlie Bucket grew thinner and thinner. His face became frighteningly white and pinched. The skin was drawn so tightly over cheeks that you could see shapes of bones underneath. It seemed doubtful whether he could go on much longer like this without becoming dangerously ill. And now, very calmly, with that curious wisdom that seems to come so often to small children in times of hardship, he began to make little changes here and there in some of the things he did, so as to save his strength. In the mornings he left the house 10 minutes earlier so he could walk slowly to school without having to run. He sat quietly in classroom during recess, resting himself, while the others rushed outdoors and threw snowballs and wrestled in the snow. Everything he did now he did slowly and carefully to prevent exhaustion. Then one afternoon, walking back home with the icy wind in his face, and incidentally feeling hungrier than he had ever felt before in his life, his eye was caught by a piece of paper that was just lying in the gutter, in the snow. The paper was of greenish color, and there was something vaguely familiar about it. Charlie stepped off the curb and bent down to examine it. Part of it was buried under the snow, but he saw at once what it was. It was a $1 bill. Quickly he looked around. Had somebody just dropped it? No, that was impossible because of the way part of it was buried. Several people went hurrying past him on the sidewalk, their chins sunk deep in their collars or their cloaks, their feet crunching in the snow, and none of them were searching for any of the money. None of them were taking the slightest notice of the small boy crouching in the gutter. This was it. This $1. Could he have it? Carefully, Charlie pulled it out from under the snow. It was damp and dirty, but otherwise perfect. A whole $1. He held it tightly between his shivering fingers, gazing down at it. It meant one thing to him at that moment, only one thing. It meant food. Automatically, Charlie turned and began moving towards the nearest shop. It was only 10 paces away, and it was a newspaper stationery store, the kind that sells almost everything, including candy and cigars. And what he would do, he whispered quickly to himself. Hold on, I have to give a lifetime ban. There we go. Oh, I haven't had to do one of those in a while. And what he would do, he whispered quickly to himself. What he would buy one luscious bar of candy and eat it all up. Every bit of it right then and there, and the rest of the money he would take straight back home and give it to his mother. Chapter 11. The Miracle. Charlie entered the store and laid the damp $1 bill on the counter. "One Wonka's Whipple Scrumpish Fudge Mallow Delight," he said, remembering how much he loved the one that he had had on his birthday. The man behind the counter looked fat and well-fed. He had big lips and fat cheeks and a very fat neck. The fat around his neck bulged out all around the top collar like a rubber ring. He turned and reached behind him. for the candy bar, but then he turned back again and handed it to Charlie.
Charlie grabbed it and quickly took off the wrapper and took an enormous bite. Then he took another, and another, and another, and oh, the sweet joy of being able to cram large pieces of something sweet and solid into one's mouth. The sheer blissful joy of being able to fill one's mouth with rich, solid food. "You look like you wanted that one, sonny," said the shopkeeper pleasantly. Charlie nodded, his mouth bulging with chocolate. The shopkeeper put Charlie's change on the counter. "Take it easy. It'll give you a gut ache if you swallow it like that without chewing." Charlie went on wolfing down the candy. He couldn't stop, and in less than half a minute the whole thing had disappeared down his throat. He was quite out of breath, and he felt marvelously, extraordinarily happy. He reached out a hand to take the change, and then he paused. His eyes were just above the level of the counter. They were staring at the little silver coins lying there. The coins were all dimes. There were 9 of them altogether. Surely it wouldn't matter if he just spent one more. I think, he said quietly, I think I'll have just one more of those candy bars. The same kind as before, please. "Why not?" said the fat shopkeeper, and reached behind him, and taking another Whipple Scrumpish Fudge Mallow Delight from behind the shelf, he laid it out on the counter. Charlie picked it up and tore off the counter, and suddenly, from underneath the wrapper, there came a brilliant flash of gold. Charlie's heart stood still. "Oh my God! It's a golden ticket!" screamed the shopkeeper, leaping about a foot in the air. "You've got a golden ticket! You found the last golden ticket! Hey, what do you know? Come look at this, everybody! This kid's found Wonka's last golden ticket. There it is! It's right there in his hands!" It seemed as though the shopkeeper might be going to have a fit. "In my shop too! He found it right here in my little shop! Somebody call the newspaper quick and let them know. Watch out now, Sonny. Don't tear it up as you unwrap it. That thing's precious." And in a few seconds there was a crowd of about 20 people clustering around Charlie, and many of them were pushing their way in from the street. Everybody wanted to look at the golden ticket and at the lucky finder. "Where is it? Hold it up so all of us can see it." There it is. He's holding it in his hand. See the gold shining? "How did he manage to find it? I'd like to know." 20 bars a day. I've been buying it for weeks and weeks." "Think of all the free stuff he'll be getting too," another person added enviously. "A lifetime supply." "He'll need it, the skinny little shrimp," said a girl, laughing. Charlie hadn't even moved. He hadn't even unwrapped the golden ticket from around the candy bar. He was standing very still, holding it tightly in his hands, while the crowd pushed and shouted all around him. He felt quite dizzy. There was a peculiar floating sensation coming over him, as though he were floating in the air like a balloon. His feet didn't seem to be touching the ground at all. He could hear his heart thumping away, loudly, somewhere in his throat. At that point he became aware of a hand resting lightly on his shoulder, and when he looked up, he saw a tall man standing over him. "Listen, I'll buy it from you. I'll give you $50. How about it, eh? I'll give you a new bicycle as well, yeah?" "Are you crazy?" shouted a woman who was standing equally close. "Why, I'd give him $500 for that ticket. You want to sell that ticket for $500, young man?" "That's quite enough of that," said the shopkeeper, pushing his way through the crowd and taking Charlie firmly by the arm. "Leave the kid alone, will you? Make way here. Let him out. Now, Charlie, don't you let anybody have it. Take it straight home quickly before you lose it. Run all the way and don't stop till you get there, you understand?" Charlie nodded. "You know something? I have a feeling you need... You know something? I have a feeling you needed a break like this, and I'm awfully glad you got it. Good luck to you, Sonny." "Thank you," Charlie said, and off he went running through the snow as fast as his legs would go. And as he flew past Mr. Willy Wonka's factory, he turned and waved at it and sang out, "I'll be seeing you! I'll be seeing you soon!" And 5 minutes later, he arrived at his own home. And that's the end of chapters 5 through 11.